When Judge Arthur Pierce looked at the woman who walked into his courtroom, he saw nothing special. He leaned into his microphone and sneered, "People like you don't belong here." He had no idea what a colossal mistake he'd just made, because he only saw the plain clothes. He missed the steel of the former federal agent inside them, and he sure as hell didn't see that she hadn't come to win a case. She'd come to settle a score. At the defendant's table, her brother Caleb sat alone, his hands cuffed in his lap, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked defeated. When Eleanor took the empty chair beside him, a bailiff immediately broke from the wall and stepped forward, his face tight with authority. "Ma'am," he said, his voice sharp, his hand resting near his belt. "That seat is for licensed counsel only. I need to see your identification. Now." Eleanor didn't even flinch. She slowly opened a folder on the table and slid out a single folded document. The bailiff took it, unfolded it, and froze. His jaw muscle twitched. The paper in his hand wasn't just official, it was undeniable. "Stay put," he muttered, turning on his heel and marching straight to the bench. Judge Arthur Pierce was deliberately shuffling papers, making a show of not looking up. "We allow for public observers," he said to no one in particular, "not participants." The bailiff leaned in, handed him the document, and whispered something. That's when the judge finally looked up. His eyes found Eleanor and locked onto her, studying her not like a person, but like a problem he needed to solve. A small, cruel chuckle escaped his lips. "Well now," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Representing the accused, are we?" Eleanor's voice was calm and steady. "I am, Your Honor." The judge shook his head, a mocking smile playing on his lips as he looked out at the gallery. "I love these. Always a good show." A few nervous chuckles echoed from the back rows. Eleanor's eyes never left his. "Is there a problem with the paperwork?" The judge's smile vanished. "Miss Monroe," he said, picking up the paper, "are you aware this is a felony case? That your brother is facing a decade behind bars?" "I am," she replied. "And you, a layperson, intend to act as his counsel?" He scoffed. "This isn't a community center dispute. This is a court of law, a real one." Caleb looked up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Eleanor's voice didn't get louder, but it sharpened to a fine point. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I am well aware of the law." Judge Pierce leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Knowing the law and practicing it, Miss Monroe, are two very different things." She met his gaze without blinking. "I've done both." A dead silence fell over the room. The air crackled. The moment stretched for a half-second too long. Visibly flustered, the judge slapped his file shut. "Fine," he grumbled. "Let's just hope your little courtroom experiment doesn't waste all of our time." It was then that a man in the back row, dressed in a plain gray suit with an expression carved from stone, made a single note on his pad. Caleb leaned in, whispering, "Ellie, you don't have to do this." Her eyes stayed locked on the judge. "Yes," she whispered back. "I do." Judge Pierce banged his gavel. "Let's begin," he declared, but it was too late. Something had already begun the moment she walked through those doors, and the prosecutor, rising slowly with the practiced ease of a man who believed the outcome was already decided, was about to find that out. The prosecutor got up and started talking circles. He didn't have facts, so he threw mud. He spoke about Caleb's known associations and a pattern of behavior, but offered zero proof. No names, no pictures, just smoke. Eleanor let him finish his little speech. Then she stood. She didn't raise her voice. She just laid out the simple, professional truth. "Your Honor, we haven't received the forensic reports. We haven't seen the chain of custody for the weapon or the fingerprint analysis. We have nothing to support what the prosecutor is claiming." Judge Pierce waved her off like she was a fly. "The gun was in the car, Miss Monroe. That's that. The car wasn't registered to my brother," Eleanor said flatly. "And the arrest report says there were no prints on the weapon. Those are the facts." The judge glared at her. He didn't like being corrected. "What I see," he said, his voice full of acid, "is you trying to make trouble where there isn't any." He leaned into the microphone. "You're shopping for justice from the discount aisle counsel." He basically called her cheap trash in a room full of people. He was telling everyone that a person like her and her brother weren't worth the court's good time. Caleb felt his stomach drop. It was that old, familiar feeling of being made small, of being powerless while a man in charge decides you're not worth respecting. But Eleanor stood her ground. "Objection," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The judge will not make personal comments about the defense." Pierce just smirked. "A little sarcasm is allowed, Miss Monroe." Her eyes were like chips of flint. "So is a little respect." The room went dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the prosecutor looked down at his shoes. The judge's face turned red. He banged his gavel, but the sound was weak. He had lost control of the room, and he knew it. In the back, the man in the gray suit wrote something down. Eleanor sat. Caleb leaned over. "Are you all right? This is the easy part," she said, her eyes fixed on the judge. And you had to wonder what in God's name she'd been through in her life, if this was the easy part. That night, she had an old case file open on her desk. Looking at it wasn't about feeling the pain of the past. It was a reminder of every smug, smiling man like Judge Pierce she had ever faced. A reminder of what happens when you stay quiet and let them get away with it. This wasn't about old anger. This was about old lessons, and she was about to use every single one of them. That ache she felt wasn't just about the courtroom. It was an old wound, the kind that stays quiet for years until a man like Judge Pierce says something smug and stupid, and suddenly it's pulsing again. The file on her desk was the reason why. The cover was stamped confidential. Inside was the story of a woman who once wore a federal agent's badge and believed in it. She wasn't just any agent. She was one of the youngest investigators in the Chicago office, and the only black woman leading a major corruption probe called Operation Keystone. She was going after dirty cops and the money they were laundering. She remembered the exact day it all fell apart. The agent she trusted most, a kid she'd taken under her wing, sold her out, handing her field notes straight to a crooked U.S. attorney. The official story? They told her the operation was shut down, that it was too unstable. But a few weeks later, the men she was investigating got promotions. She got a desk with no computer and no cases. They buried her. She hadn't fought it back then. She'd thought if she just stayed quiet, the system would eventually correct itself. She learned a hard lesson. Justice doesn't move unless someone gives it a shove. Her sleeve slipped back, and you could just see the faint line of a scar on her wrist. She remembered how she got it. A night operation that went bad. A target she shouldn't have been chasing alone. Her backup never showed. Not because they were late, because they were never sent. When she got back to HQ and found her report deleted from the system, she stopped lying to herself. They hadn't forgotten her. They had abandoned her. On purpose. Now, years later, she was back in a courtroom. Not as an agent with a badge, but as a woman with a folder, defending a brother who couldn't afford anyone else. She looked at the wall, but she wasn't seeing plaster. She was seeing Judge Pierce, sitting on a bench he didn't deserve, smirking at her. He reminded her of every man who had ever smiled while telling a lie. This wasn't just about a personal insult. This was about history, and she hadn't come back for closure. She'd come back to finish the job they had all tried to bury. No one in that courtroom knew her story. Not the jury, not even Caleb. But now you do. The next morning, the first thing she did was call the prosecution's star witness to the stand. The state calls Leo Nash. The kid who shuffled forward looked like a deer caught in the headlights. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, the sound echoing in the tense silence. He was young, not just in years, but in spirit. He looked terrified, clinging to the edge of the witness chair like he might fall off. Eleanor rose slowly. She didn't approach him like a predator. She just watched him for a moment, letting the room settle. Then she spoke, her voice low and calm. "Leo, you told the detectives you saw my brother Caleb on the night of October 12th. Is that right?" The kid cleared his throat. "Yes, that's what I told them." Eleanor took a slow step forward. "And what exactly did you see?" Leo blinked, his eyes darting around the room. "Someone running from the alley. They were holding something, but I couldn't see what. And could you see who it was?" Leo hesitated, swallowing hard. His eyes flickered toward the prosecutor. "It was dark," he finally mumbled. "But the detective, he told me they had Caleb." Eleanor didn't press him. She just waited, letting the silence in the courtroom do the work for her. Leo Nash's knee bounced up and down. He risked a look at the prosecutor, who was suddenly very interested in his own shoes. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it cut right through the tension. "Let me ask you a simpler question, Leo. Did you actually see my brother that night? Or were you just repeating what the detective told you to say?" That was it. That was the question that broke him. Leo's voice cracked. "He told me it had to be Caleb," the kid admitted, the words spilling out. "He said I'd be in trouble if I didn't back up their story. A wave of quiet gas went through the gallery. The truth had just landed like a lead weight. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel. This witness is speculating. Eleanor turned to him, her voice cold as steel. He's not speculating, Your Honor. He's confessing. The judge pointed a trembling finger at her. You're out of line, Miss Monroe. And you're out of order, she shot back, her voice still level. If you think threatening a witness is just part of the game. The truth belongs in this courtroom. Even if you don't like the sound of it, the room went dead silent. The power had clearly shifted. Judge Pierce looked like a man who had just lost control of his own ship. On the witness stand, the fear in Leo Nash's eyes was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated relief. But he wasn't finished. He looked straight at Eleanor, and his voice was rough with emotion. You probably don't remember me, he said, talking more to her than to the court. But I remember you. You came to my high school a few years back for a justice prep program. A murmur went through the jury box. You told us, Leo said, a sad smile on his face, that the truth is always louder than fear. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. He took a shaky breath. I guess I forgot that. Until today. And then it happened. From the back of the gallery, a single person started to clap. A slow, steady, defiant sound. The judge shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. He hammered the gavel so hard the microphone squealed. Order! This is not a theater. One more sound and I will clear this gallery. The clapping stopped. But it was too late. Eleanor didn't even look at the judge. She just gave the kid on the stand a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of connection. She walked back to her table. You used to do that in the classrooms, Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Every Thursday, she nodded. From the back row, the man in the gray suit, who hadn't moved a muscle for days, finally shifted. He leaned forward and gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. Eleanor felt it more than she saw it. As she reached for her folder, her sleeve caught the edge and pulled back for just a second. Under the harsh courtroom lights, a long, jagged scar on her wrist flashed into view. It was nothing, but it was everything. That's a Kevlar burn, one of the bailiffs whispered to his partner. You don't get those from filing paperwork. The whisper rippled through the room. At the bench, Judge Arthur Pierce froze. His face went pale. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. She wasn't supposed to come back, he breathed, so low it was almost inaudible. But Eleanor heard him. Caleb leaned in, his eyes wide. You told me you walked away from all that. Eleanor took a quiet breath, her gaze still locked forward. I thought I did, she said. And in that instant, everyone saw her for what she was. Not just a sister, not just another lawyer. The mask was gone. The man in the gray suit was no longer watching a court case. He was watching a predator he had underestimated. The judge's hand trembled as he reached for his glass of water. The silence in the room was different now. It was heavy with questions, with history, and with a distinct, cold feeling of fear. Judge Pierce made his final, fatal mistake. Leaning into his microphone, he sneered, You people always think you can twist the law to fit your anger. The room went cold. Before the insult could settle, Eleanor was on her feet. We don't twist the law, Your Honor, she said, her voice quiet and dangerous. We hold it up to a mirror. This isn't a classroom, Ms. Monroe, he spat. No, she agreed. Because in a classroom, I'd have to teach you about the principles of justice you've clearly forgotten. Her words hung in the air, a stunning indictment. Visibly panicked, the judge saw the man in the gray suit give a subtle, almost invisible signal from the back of the room. This court is adjourned for the day, Pierce barked, trying to flee. Eleanor stood firm. Justice doesn't retire early just because you're uncomfortable, Your Honor. As if on cue, the courtroom doors banged open. 3 federal agents in dark suits entered and strode purposefully toward the bench. The lead agent held up a warrant. Judge Arthur Pierce, you are under arrest. Obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, abuse of judicial authority. This is my courtroom, Pierce croaked, his face pale. No, sir, the agent said coldly, taking the gavel from the judge's desk. This is the people's courtroom, and they've been watching. The agents cuffed the judge's hands behind his back. The sharp click of the metal echoed in the silent room, a final, definitive sound of a corrupt man's career ending. The lead agent turned. All charges against Caleb Monroe are dismissed, effective immediately. The bailiffs unlocked Caleb's handcuffs. He stood up and pulled his sister into a fierce hug, finally free. As the disgraced judge was being led away, the man in the gray suit approached Eleanor. He spoke in a low voice only she could hear. Your complaint from all those years ago finally made it to the right desk, Agent Monroe. You started this. Eleanor watched her brother, saw the relief on the young witness's face, and looked at the empty judge's bench. This was more than a victory. It was a restoration. She hadn't just won a case. She had forced the system to look itself in the mirror and, for one day at least, see clearly.